Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm absolutely excited and delighted to be here. But first and foremost, good morning to everyone here. Hope you've had a lovely morning to begin with, and that should be quite an interesting one as you listen to this panel. So I'm Dr. Monica Lopez, and I am a privacy officer for VHC Health, but also the co-founder and CEO of Cognitive Insights for Artificial Intelligence. And as we all know right now, and I will introduce our panelists here in a moment, but I just want to say a few words about what this AI, this artificial intelligence that we're going to be talking about. And as you know, it truly is shaping our world at extraordinary speed. And we're really seeing this move, this technology transform and move not only from years of development, but now it's from months to days to even minutes. We're seeing new versions of this technology being created. And so we're seeing this implementation, this tracking and monitoring of AI-enabled systems really causing a range of transformations, and it's happening across all industries. I mean, we're seeing it in healthcare, we're seeing it as it affects human rights, we're seeing it also in education, and also in how we deal with climate and climate action in general. And so the resulting changes of these transformations, they can either deepen inequalities, I think we can all agree with that, and we've already seen that happening, but they can really also deliver meaningful and truly beneficial impact at scale. And that is one of the issues really that we're going to be talking about here. But something I want to also mention is that AI's impact is not predetermined. Its power for good really does depend on the intentional choices we make now. And those intentional choices are what need to inform how we design the technology, how we govern the technology, how we, most importantly, how we build it to truly serve and ultimately empower the individuals for which we're making this technology for and with. And so it is this human-centered perspective that truly we here as speakers, the panelists here are going to discuss in terms of what this means to inform the present, and the one that is so absolutely critical if we want to ensure that we get ultimate beneficial and sustainability with this technology. And so this brings up a question that I think all of us here in the audience I would like you to have in the back of your mind as we discuss really, this question of who should have the most influence in shaping how AI technologies are developed and used? And of course you could say, well, is it government and policymakers? Is it the private sector and tech companies? Is it researchers and technologists? Is it communities and civil society? And or is it truly a shared collaborative approach? And if such is to be the case, how do you actually successfully achieve that? So as I mentioned, I'm absolutely excited to be here and with these wonderful individuals here. And really they are a fantastic group of innovators, social entrepreneurs, and technologists who are precisely embedding equity, accountability, and trust across the entire AI value chain as they work in partnership, in true partnership with their communities, and as they scale their work. So I have here Dima Saber from Meedan. I have also Alloysius Attah from Farmerline, and then Karina, Rios, Michel from Girl Effect. And so to begin our conversation, I would like us to first start off with our first question here of, please introduce your work. And by introducing your work, if you can explain to the audience here, really what was the exact moment of realization that really made you understand the importance of how to shape people's lives and the opportunities they have using technology? So can we start here with Karina?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm the Chief Creative and Technology Officer at Girl Effect, and I've been with Girl Effect for about 15 years now. I started off based in Rwanda, where I lived and worked for 4 years, which was then Nike Foundation, and we were looking at how media and communication can shift perceptions around what is normal for a girl to do and not to. Both her internalized norms, but also how communities perceived girls. And this came to life then in the form of a magazine. It was called Linyaminga, which in Kinyarwanda means the beautiful girl on the inside and the outside who makes wise decisions. And we distributed this magazine in every district of Rwanda, 100,000 copies every quarter. But what really changed everything for us was an Ask Auntie column in the magazine called Baza Shangazi, where every magazine issue, Baza would answer questions from girls and young people across Rwanda. And we worked with schools and we worked with community-based organizations for the first issues to collect these questions. But we were really overwhelmed with the response after distributing several issues. Schools, communities, parents, and even young people were showing up at our offices, sending us handwritten notes. And we discovered this really deep pain point and unmet need amongst young people and communities around not having a safe space to ask questions. I had the fortune to go to the podcast with Trevor Noah this week, and we had this amazing woman that started off with feeding 10 children every day, and today she's now feeding 600,000. And similar to that journey, we decided, well, how do we answer these questions? We can answer 10 questions every quarter in a magazine, but could we answer 10 questions every week on a text and radio show, which we did. Then we set out to answer 100 questions via mobile sites with moderators. And then in 2018, we wanted to answer 1,000 questions every month or every week via a chatbot that we integrated with WhatsApp. It was not AI enhanced, it was a rule-based chatbot. But fast forward to today, we now have 3 chatbots called Big Sis in South Africa, Wazi in Kenya, and Bolbehen in India. It has answered over 50 million questions from young people, reaching 3 million young people to date. And every day we answer about 80,000 questions. 1 in 4 of our users are now seeking health care access. And yeah, it's all started with a folded up piece of paper in Rwanda 15 years ago to scaling a platform that can finally match the size of the need of young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And you said 80,000. Wow. Really, quite an accomplishment.
Thank you.
Dima.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Before I start, I just want to recognize a moment that some of us are coming to this, something that we haven't been talking a lot about at Skoll as well, but on a tale of a long war that's been going on for the last 3 months, but also 3 years of genocide on Gaza. So I do want to take a moment to recognize this and say that we are exhausted, but we show up, because otherwise the communities who are doing the work on the ground, they demand more of us. So I just wanted to take a minute to recognize this on the stage that was offered to me. So my name is Dima. I'm the executive director of Meedan. Meedan is an organization that builds open access tools that allows communities to answer questions, ask questions of their newsrooms, their journalists, the human rights defenders, in moments of exception. So our work is particularly important when there's an election happening, or when there's a revolution, or when there's a humanitarian crisis. I want to take us to the time when the internet was not scary, when we were not worried about what AI is going to do to our kids or to our minds. So there has been a time where the internet was exciting. It was what helped us mobilize. It was what helped us protect our bodies and not survey our bodies. So Meedan was born we're 20 years old, but our work actually started in 2011 when the Arab uprisings were sweeping most of the cities. And the very first initiatives we started to organize around was an initiative called Speak to Tweet, is when the Egyptian government shut down the internet. And so a bunch of activists put together international lines that allowed people in Egypt to just call a landline and leave a voice note, and that voice note got translated and then posted on Twitter. So it was the hopeful years of the internet. So before we go into what the AI, let's just remember that this tool was something that used to excite us, that used to be something that we used to do good stuff in the world. So the question is, how do we take that back now? Our work is around building, similar to Karina's work, we build open access tools inside closed messaging apps. Our first tool was called Check, and it allows organizations, mainly newsrooms, we focus a lot of our work on human rights defenders and journalists, to launch what we call tip lines. So it's a phone number that people give to their audiences, and it allows them to ask a question and answer these questions. It was menu-based, and we worked across over 50 elections over the last 5 years. Hundreds of thousands of people ask questions about where should they vote, where they should be looking, what's happening in their polling stations, but also questions about sexual reproductive health rights, questions around gender-based violence. The moment when, to answer the question about when we realized that access to information was important to save lives, not just to inform, was during the 2023 Syria-Turkey earthquake, when there were people actually sat in their cars, just like too afraid to go sleep in their houses because there were misinformation around buildings falling down. So we launched tip lines across Jordan, Syria, and Turkey, across languages, and empowered organizations to fight misinformation, so to take pieces of these questions from hundreds of thousands of people, fact-check them by humans, and send back information that was verified. And this is why, and since, I've been going around everywhere saying access to information is a human right. The people's ability to access information in their languages, that is hyper-local, that reflects their reality, saves their lives, and is as important as eating, as accessing vaccines, and as going to school. And this is something we need to just keep in mind.
Absolutely, and we're going to get to the question of data and information in a moment. So thank you for also bringing that up. And Alloysius?
Happy to be here. My name is Alloysius from a company called Farmerline, West Africa. We have teams on the ground in Ghana, Ivory Coast, Togo, Benin. We build technology specifically to do 3 things: to help farmers to get access to information, help farmers to get access to finance, and also to help them to sell their crops so they can make more money. Partners like Hershey, Tony's Open Chain, World Food Program, they've used our tools across 50 countries to support 2.2 million farmers. And then the question that you asked around how did we know that information is going to be transformational to people? For me, I asked that question. We asked that question. I and my team asked this question about 13 years ago when we were just like young coders building SMS applications. And we went to the field to meet farmers, and we started talking to them, and we asked them this question. And what came out was, whatever what we're building has to be connected to their dreams and their goals. And their dream at the time and their dream today has been to increase, to create lasting profit for farmers, to increase income. So then the question we started asking ourselves, like, how do we build tools to deliver all that they need to reach their goals? And the steps that we found was around, like, okay, let's give them information on how to plant well, information on how to get access to the best finance, and also information on where to sell and how to sell to make the most money. So for us, like, that was like the first aha moment. But we didn't start out to be an AI company. When we started digging into the information aspect, we made a lot of assumptions before meeting them. We built SMS application, blasting messages. We're quite proud of ourselves when we're pushing a lot of messages. And we went to the field and we asked questions and realized that they don't really care about the SMS that we're sending because it was in English. And many people speak, like, they love to express and consume content in the language that they understand. So before we built DALI AI, an AI platform that now speaks 43 African languages today, the first version of our application was a laptop, an audio file of an extension officer the farmers know and trust, and going to them and playing the audio to them. And they could see it, like, their eye. They're like, oh, wow, they love the information, they trust it. And research shows that when you give information to people in the manner that they can consume and trust, adoption goes up drastically. So for us, that was like the first aha moment for us. And then the question then became, like, how do we build technology to get it to as many farmers as possible? How do we make it scalable? How do we ensure we're actually delivering the impact in line with their goals, which is money in their pocket? Like, for the farmers that we're working with. And then how do we also make it affordable and repeatable so that if anything happens in the world, and it always does happen in agriculture, COVID happened and the macros, and then there's this war, they have all the support that they need to be a bit more resilient and to keep working towards their goals and not give up. So for us, that was like the big moment. I'm happy to go into it down the line when we get there. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And so really what we're seeing here in the three of you is that there truly is a response to a gap in information which ultimately is about data. And so that's where I would like for us to now really have a conversation, because we know that discussions around AI infrastructure really tend to focus on compute and hardware, connectivity, networks, and also just software platforms in general. But what I want us to focus on really is the idea, the concept of data as infrastructure. And so considering that we know that AI-enabled systems depend on data, and just in general, what knowledge and information is about, how do you therefore, and this really is, all of you are touched upon it, but I want you to go into more detail. So how do you actually create and provide that absolutely necessary, informative piece of information to be able to reach the communities that you want to reach?
Yeah, you're looking at me. Yeah, so I think for Girl Effect, because we have been speaking with young people for over a decade, because we've been able to collect all the questions they have about growing up, whether it's their body curiosities, whether it's their well-being, mental health and love and relationships, we have a very large data set that's representative of their voices, of their needs. And we're able to take that and design solutions that show up in a way that works in their reality. Because for us, even though we've spent years understanding their needs, it's not just about the data and the infrastructure, it's about the trust that you have with young people, and that information needs to be delivered in a way that shows up within their reality, in a way that they relate to, they resonate with, that is fun and entertaining, but valuable. And so the data that we're collecting allows us to ensure that the content that we provide for them is, of course, accurate and factual. Trust really comes from co-creating with them how they want to read it, what it sounds like, the tonality. And as we've been leveraging AI, that's possibly some of the hardest things to get right. Increasingly, large language models are hallucinating less bias. We don't have any huge challenges around accuracy. Probably the biggest challenge that we do face is around context and being able to produce answers using AI and generative AI that's culturally appropriate. And that has meant a lot of work working with what we call data curators, where we have to clean and produce through iteration cycles outputs that a team of young women feel is reflective of their realities. Because we know that for trust and the outcomes we want to achieve, if teenagers are hypervigilant, they're actually switched off when it comes to lecturing them and educating them and information. They don't want a teacher telling them these things. So we have to approach them as peer through our products, gain their trust, and hopefully through the information, inspire them and motivate them to see the importance of their health and connect at a time when they're ready to services.
You mentioned that you have curators that are curating the data to be appropriate to this particular population. So who exactly are these curators, and how do you define and decide that those individuals should be curators? Because you're talking about trust, and you're talking about, these young women don't want the teachers to be telling them how to think or what to say. And so these curators, in a way, it's a kind of an indirect way of teaching or informing that population. So can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're leveraging language models, every decision that you make and what goes into training them, into the guardrails, into the eval frameworks that ensure that every output that's generated is accurate and safe, appropriate and reliable, every decision that you make, we ensure as an organization that those people making those decisions are as close to the user in terms of a lived experience as possible. So our data curators are really young women that we train, and they work alongside health experts and gender experts, and they help us understand if the LLMs and our chatbots are maintaining an editorial style that is relatable, that the tone, and young people are very, in our work, vigilant around tone and how you need to speak to them across different subject matters. If a young person's asking around their well-being, if they're asking around sexual health, they don't want us using, hey, show me, what's up? They want you to talk to them in a much more serious fashion because this is serious to them. So we work with young women, and they help us understand the tonality, how to use steerable prompts to get the tone correct. And when we're sometimes trying to be too ultra cool, young people are always telling us, you're cringing us at the moment. That's too much, take it back a notch. So we have a lot of roles open to entry-level positions for our data curators.
And so what you're really highlighting here is that it's the users themselves who are controlling the knowledge.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that is fundamental. So without that, you really can't serve that community.
Exactly.
And I think that bridges perfectly with, our Dima, the work you're doing. So can you also discuss in terms of
absolutely
of data?
Yes, we work. We've got partners in about 65 countries. Czech speaks 40 languages. So Czech is the first tool that I've mentioned earlier today. We've spent the last 18 months developing a new tool, which we launched on Tuesday, called Suwali. And in the launch, I was saying, while AI is used to militarize and survey our bodies and target people, we choose to launch a new chatbot as the world needed a new chatbot. But I do fundamentally believe in the need of communities designing their own infrastructural system of knowledge exchange. So rather than making the technology for them, we've been building this technology with organizations that we've worked with for 20 years. The secret is to not show up on election day or to not show up when a crisis hit. The secret is to be around when nothing's happening, because this is where the real stuff around gender-based violence become viral. This is where the infrastructure gets used against people. And this is where trust actually gets built. We've been operating in those contexts for long enough for people to trust us with our data. And it's a scary statement to make, to say that organizations that work, I want to give a shout to my guy who are here as well, at Skoll and work with sexual reproductive health rights, with journalists who trust us with the data of their communities so that we make sense of it together is an amazing endeavor, but also a huge sense of responsibility. And so my answer is co-design, absolutely, but not design it yourself and then call it co-design. There's a lot of, we make the technology for them and then we call it co-design. Co-design is in go with humility, build bots like Suwali, for example. Suwali says, I don't know more often than not. And people are not used to a bot that you ask it a question. They want just immediate, fast, accurate, quick questions. But we want a bot that thinks, that learns, that's got the humility to listen. And the only way to do that is to do it with the people. So the assumptions we make about what people want, the idea of one LLM that fits us all is a colonial assumption. And we need to learn to deconstruct our assumptions about the technologies that people need and to build the technology ourselves. This is where I want to get, because there's a lot that we can do with community partners on the ground. We've ran thousands of digital literacy, digital security training, yet tech-facilitated gender-based violence right now is exponentially worse than it was 10 years ago. So we always say the problems we're up against are technology-enabled, and we need to design technology-informed solutions. That's the only way we can live up to the challenge. And that happens through huge sets of data that we can take, that people entrust us with, give us the gift of them, and then we try and use what we have, machine learning, research, expertise, engineering, all of that are tools rather than the actual. So we're focusing also too much on what doesn't matter, which is the machine learning themselves or the process of the infrastructure, but it's the humans behind it that matter. And then try and make sense of that data and then use that information to design better tools that allows us to uncover instances of gender-based violence across 40 languages, to process bigger amounts of data faster so that human rights defenders who are trying to build evidence that is traceable about violations that are happening on the internet, about hate and gender speech on the internet, are able to use it. So how do we use that data we have to design the tools that allow the frontline defenders to do their work better is what we should be focusing on, and not the obsession with the infrastructure and the platform itself.
And so truly then the human-centered perspective here is absolutely about what does it mean to be human in the sense of what are the needs and desires specifically of this population.
Yeah, I think we should start saying, there's a partner of us who said this, and I think it's a really good one, bot in the loop rather than human in the loop. Like, it should be a human-led process anyway. It's our technology, it's our tools. Absolutely. How do we create infrastructures that enables humans to make use of that technology in a scalable and usable way?
And so once you have this, let's say that once you see improvement of the flows of information, what would you say is, what's sort of like the first behavioral outcome that you see immediately of a shift in behavior from access now to this flow of information that is accurate, that is efficient, that is relevant to the very users that you're working with?
I mean, the moment people are making informed decisions about their lives is a magical moment. Like the moment you're in an election that is happening in a heightened context of hate speech, of racism, of far-right trying to put people against each other, being able to give people access to information that is verified, that is hyper-local, that takes in context, it saves lives on a health perspective, on a societal perspective. We make better informed decisions about the people who represent us. And ultimately, it saves us. Like the exponential impact of what it means for young people to access information about their sexual health, or about what does the gender-based violence means, or political decisions about the people they're voting for to represent them, is the basis of our democracies, of our societies. And we should be paying more attention to that than we are right now.
Absolutely. And so this brings us then further to Alloysius. In fact, if you could, the same question in terms of data and the importance of that and how you acquire it and collect it. And you started to discuss that. But also, can you highlight in terms of the economic opportunity that now provides?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the question. Data as infrastructure, like my colleague says, Dima, Karina mentioned, trust and respect is extremely key. Same for agriculture as well. In our case, when you meet farmers, whether small-scale farmers or commercial farmers, just understanding and knowing where they are is very important. And also understanding that they have a lot more mileage when it comes to working the land, tilling the land more than anybody else. So like information on how to work the land and all that like is a suggestion, but they are the experts. So just knowing where to stand when we're giving such advice. But then also just like being very clear on the value that we bring. So for instance, now fertilizer prices are going up. So farmers will struggle to buy fertilizer on the spot, right? So giving advice on getting fertilizer on credit for the entire season, but then investing in higher value crops with higher margins, that gives them a lot more cushion as a diversification strategy, something that we as an organization do to complement what they already do, right? The second thing also is the aggregation and co-creation of content that we share with them. Understanding that the intelligence and the knowledge exists local, it exists in the community, and every community is very different. So for instance, we are working with some rice farmers in a place called Avalavi where we have a government irrigation scheme. We support a lot of farmers there, but there are some parts of the land that always flood every August. This information that we wouldn't know if we didn't pay attention, if we didn't go with humility. So just knowing that and using that information to inform our agronomy advice, and then the kind of financing that we give to the farmers is also very key. The third thing is also distribution. Distributing the content and the technology through the networks that they already trust. When it comes to people, like in low-income people or anyone else, like for you to consume any information, you're looking for your signals of trust. When it comes to farmers, the extension officer in the community is very key. Using their voice is very key. Leveraging the mom and pop shop that is selling the fertilizer to them is still very key. The person that buys the cocoa from them, if you're a cocoa buying company that has been paying them all this income for the last 20 to 30 years, leveraging that as a channel to reach them is extremely key. I'm Ghanaian, but if I go to northern Ghana and I don't speak the language, and I try to enter a community, the learning curve is going to take me 3 years to earn trust. But if I work with an extension officer, if I work with a mom and pop shop or someone or an aggregator that already works there, it's very, very quickly. So those are some of the ways that we use to build content and also distribute the technology. Talking about trust and respect, also being just very upfront about the limitations of the technology. In our case, we thought the AI that we built. So we built, we have a system called DALI AI. It's a 911 for farmers. It speaks in 43 African languages. And the reason why we built it was to help us scale our call center solutions. So, because we used to have a lot of humans answering calls, and we're like, oh yeah, we're going to build AI. And then when farmers call, then AI will answer all the questions. We figured out the TTS part, the ASR part, but then the inference, when someone calls and actually speaks, the time it takes for the AI to go find a response and bring it back, it's like you're talking to a person and the person waits 30 seconds before they answer you. Trust is already broken. So we know very well from there that, our AI agent will not be a smart call center agent. And it's not going to be an agent that's going to inspire trust and allow people to adopt the content that you're giving. But it will be a great translator, right? So if someone calls to complain about how our driver spent 3 days on the road before delivering the fertilizer, and when they call and you're ranting in the phone, the AI can record that, transcribe it, and then the person in the office can take it and take action. So just being very honest about the limitations of those technologies actually really, really help. So talking about economic impact, just using that information, for instance, like I mentioned earlier, fertilizer. When I was in the field in a place called OT region, that's about a month ago, and then these very experienced farmers come to me and they ask me, what should we plant? Not because they are not skilled, not because they don't know what to plant, but they're asking this question very strategically. They're asking us an investment decision. Which crop should we grow, given what is happening in the world right now, to make the most return, right? So just giving advice on the kind of fertilizer to get. So we used to do a lot of inorganic, and now we're like, hey, get organic fertilizer. If you get organic fertilizer, you can grow, let's say, turmeric or ginger in addition to your rice. And when you grow the rice, you can sell it in Ghana, but the turmeric and ginger, you can sell it in Europe. You sell it in Europe, the margins are better, right? So those kind of advice. But also being very clear, hey, here's a worst case scenario in terms of yield that could happen. But also this is the best case scenario. So being very careful not to promise, not to act like a prophet, is also very, very key, because these are people that have been taken advantage of, abused, and lied to many times. And when they meet you, they're like looking, are you going to take me for granted? Are you going to try and abuse me? Are you going to try and gaslight me? And if you use a channel of trust, if you go with respect, often adoption goes high, and then you both co-create and hopefully win together.
So what we're all of us here are discussing really is how important this information is truly to improve decision making. And we've seen that at this point, having fast internet, having low connectivity, and certainly the English language is truly insufficient for the complexity, the uncertainty of this world, and the realities of many individuals. So how would you, can you explain to us really how, in developing these solutions that you have already developed and are continuing to improve, how do you address these diverse cultural contexts? How do you ensure that the languages that need to be represented are being represented? How do you ensure that the action, you started with this point of really speaking in the voice and the tone of the individuals. And so how do you make sure that of all the data that you're able to collect and data that is entering into this ecosystem that not necessarily you personally collected as an organization, how do you ensure that you truly are catering to this diversity of users? And really any one of you can.
It's bloody hard.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think that's the question
really,
here.
really
Because
hard.
how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, the internet is made by and for English white middle-class men.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. So make it work for African girls and Arabs under the bombs and, you know, African farmers is like an impossible task. It is hard. We've been training, I mean, I'm Lebanese. It's like my mother tongue language. It's really, really hard to make Swahili speak proper Arabic because of the amount of dialects in the language, because of the richness of the language, because people come to it from different kind of questions and different kind of technologically, there's things we can do that we can try to do. We're using, we've built an infrastructure that allows us to shift between models so that we evaluate open weight models and non-open weight models to see what works the best for the users and for the communities we're trying to work with. But I mean, for me, most importantly is starting with recognizing that language or access or literacy isn't like a glitch, it's a structural, systemic problem. That unless we address this from the roots of it, our interventions over the tools is always going to be limited. So again, going back to building tools that are built with the communities that they tend to serve, in the spaces where they already are, rather than asking them to move into new spaces. Like both in our cases, we build in closed messaging apps. So human rights defenders are using Signal. People use WhatsApp in low connectivity sets. So recognizing also the context that we're coming into and taking that into the design conversations of the tools themselves, but also using those 20 years of feminist principles of the internet, of how human rights defenders have been building these tools and using that knowledge into the very design of these new tools. So not imagining that AI is this new thing that we're just starting from scratch. How can we harness the years of commitments of the feminists and the queer communities and the human rights defenders who've put their hearts and souls into developing principles of designing infrastructures that speak for the communities and that speaks their languages, but also takes into account their low connectivity, their ability to not buy desktop computers that are quite expensive. So how do we build solutions inside people's phones that can protect them? So again, for me, it always goes back to humility, and I love this thing you said, recognizing that I don't know, like I'm coming here and I want to know what works for you, and then I want to take that knowledge and take it to my engineering team and tell them, make that work for those people. And that is the only way that you can build solutions at scale, in my opinion.
So it's truly a trial and error type
iteration, failure, experimentation, and you try again, and you fail again beautifully, and you try again.
You try again. So constantly changing, constantly improving, constantly transforming. And the data that doesn't exist, the information doesn't exist, you create, you go after it, you look for it. You intentionally acquire it. That's the key word. You intentionally look for where it is because you know it already exists, but not in the accepted platforms.
Yeah, you build the infrastructures that allow people to come and use the data that exists. Those people are having these conversations anyway. My mother and her group of friends are all spreading misinformation around whether garlic is a good idea for something that's happening with your health. How can I use that to build better infrastructures that allows her and her friends to know that, when is it garlic and olive oil that will sort it, and when do you actually need a doctor?
Can you expand
It's often
on that?
olive oil, by the way. More often than not, it's olive oil, but...
Karina, can you expand on that further in terms, because you discussed that, you brought that up in terms of women's health.
Yeah. I'm going to first start on something, Alloysius, that you said, is understanding the limitations of the technology. A lot of the outcomes we're trying to achieve, chatbots aren't going to be able to achieve it in isolation. We're dealing with really complex issues, complex behaviors. And when you unpack those behaviors, information alone isn't enough to see those outcomes. We're dealing with environmental factors and social factors. And so Girl Effect, we reach 100 million people every year. Our chatbots reach about 1 million. And that's because a lot of the work that we have to do has to live outside of a chatbot to really inspire young people to talk about these issues to begin with. If a young person isn't talking about it, they don't have a question to ask a chatbot. So a lot of the work that we do, whether it's talking about garlic recipes, is instigating and creating platforms for young people to see the importance of these issues, to challenge the existing taboos and stigmas associated with that, whether that's a social media campaign with influencers, whether that's a TV drama that we launch and create podcasts associated with it. From our research, we know that if a young person talks about a behavior, they're 1.4 times or 2 times more likely to act upon it. What we do know is that young people, when they are self-reflecting, when reading this or watching this content, they have a lot of questions. Am I the type of person that can do this? Maybe some days I think I am, maybe some days I don't. Young people and teenagers are forming their identity, and they need a trusted space to talk about those issues. And that's where the role of chatbots really come into play. But when it comes to those conversations, in some markets that are digitally led, there's high mobile penetration. Young people in Kenya and South Africa, we see about 80% cell phone ownership amongst young people. Those are appropriate channels to be using. In Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Tanzania, mobile penetration is really low. So every one of our countries are going to be deploying very different products. Maybe it's radio-led, maybe it's a community outreach program. But in the case of Kenya, South Africa, and India, it is social media, YouTube, TikTok, all the places where young people are already spending their time talking about these issues and watching a lot of content. In Girl Effect's journey around creating these chatbots, yes, if we know that there's existing access, digital literacy and literacy, the real challenge was how do you build in the language that young people speak? We've heard about low resource languages. That's not even, for young people, the challenges in Swahili or Hindi, they speak in mixed coded languages. They speak in a combination of Swahili, English, and a lot of slang. English, Hindi, English, and online slang. So these are even lower resource languages. And again, speaking in the ways that they speak is critical to gain their trust. So we've had to spend years not only building the data sets, we've been working with AI for over 8 years now. We were working with BERT and language models where we had to label tens of thousands of data sets with tags of these are the themes and the classifications that we think represent this data set, and the conceptual, the cognitive load amongst our teams to do that was intense. I think what large language models have allowed us to do and the power that we see in them is that it's taken these really labor-intensive tasks around labeling data sets, and pretty much overnight it's given us the power to do that in real time and automatically, and build classification AI systems where you can have an LLM that's programmed to receive a question, tag it immediately, and map that question to an answer, deterministic AI. Generative AI is a whole other ballgame with way more complex risks associated with it. We're answering 80,000 questions every day, and if every single question is generated and unique and personalized, how do we know that it's not perpetuating bias, harms, or inaccuracies? When we first started looking at generative AI, it was sharing that pull-out is a form of contraceptive. And if you were to scale that information, that could lead to real health risks at a population level. It took us 18 months to be able to build the infrastructure all the way from where do you host it so that we can ensure that we're compliant, that young people's data is secure, what language models are best fit for this particular language. Anthropic Claude is fantastic when it comes to Swahili, terrible at English. GPT is great at South African English, terrible at Swahili. So we had to build infrastructure that didn't lock us into a single model or big tech company, but gave us the opportunities in service to the young people, but for sustainability reasons, allowed us to plug and play which model was most effective at being able to speak in the ways that we needed it to speak. And then it was 18 months of building the guardrails. When young people talk to us on our chatbots, they're likely going to disclose very sensitive information. They're going to disclose to us in times of urgent need, and they require support. So we needed systems that could detect those sensitive responses. And like you said, these need to be human-led systems. Young people around the world usually have commonly asked questions. Generative AI, as long as you know it's accurate and safe, reliable and contextually appropriate, can answer those frequently asked questions, body curiosities, love and relationships. But if a young person is coming to you with suicidal ideation, rape, or abuse, or being groomed, and they don't know that they're being groomed, you need systems that can detect that can escalate that to a human agent. So all of our chatbots have human in the loop. 30% of those questions do get escalated, either automatically due to high risk, or we give agency within our chatbots for any user to be able to say, I'd like to speak to a human. Interestingly enough, when a user requests to speak to a human, it's largely out of loneliness. We're seeing a real increasing anxiety, depression, psychosis amongst our users. In a place in South Africa, 60 to 70% of youth are experiencing issues related to anxiety and depression, and only 1 in 10 are accessing care. So we want to really build systems that both prevent escalating health issues, but in a time of need can connect them to services. So our human agents, our healthcare agents, they can book our users into a service, signpost them to the nearest clinic, or offer a telehealth service if they need to speak to a therapist.
Can I comment on the human? I think the absolute 100%, but where it becomes even harder is when the human doesn't know that this is, like, when does the bot, rather than, because the humans don't always ask to speak to a human. They come to the bots and they just are expecting immediate, quick answers to really complicated questions. So the thing we're fiddling with the most with Suali right now is how do we train Suali to know when this is a question that needs a human and is not a bot question? And what is the benchmark? So some of the most interesting work that we're doing with organizations like Digital Rights Foundation, Oh My Gyno, that work on gender-based violence, sexual reproductive health rights, is to say, what is the first 100 questions that come into your helpline that are always the same, and that quite easily force Suali to give them a link to a resource or to a website or a piece of knowledge that we know is verified and has been, accepted by a human. And at what point does the bot need to bring in a human into the conversation, and how do you do that? And those benchmarks are very, very hard to build across the languages and across the themes and across the topics in an area that's been defunded anyway, because as probably we've seen over the last few days, like, what we're up against is like sending little kids to school and putting food in kids in people's mouth, and shelter and access to vaccine and access to medication. So how do we make up space for this long process of the AI we're talking about? Is exactly the opposite of the immediacy of ChatGPT, of what people have been used to, is one that is slow, that needs to be patient, that takes time, and that takes resource. So how do we mobilize as civil society organizations, as technologists, as researchers, as human rights defenders to take the time to make the tool that our people need?
Well, and so what we've really been discussing here is you've truly demystified what we hear in the media. So, as someone who's a technologist who's been part of building this technology, something that I really dislike from what we hear in the media is this discussion of these systems being quick, easy, having magical properties. And really what we're focusing here, and thank you for going into that detail, and I'm going to ask you to go into a little more, because you said it's essentially something that takes time. It takes a lot of patience. it still is all about human-computer interaction. It is not about the system that is the all-ending powerful system of set of knowledge. It is actually completely dependent on the humans behind it, designing it piece by piece by piece by piece in small parts, willing to accepting that there will be errors, there will be failures along the way, and then immediately recognizing them and improving upon that. And so we've heard from both of you, and we'll return back, but Alloysius, can you say a little bit in terms of this whole issue that's been brought up in terms of the designing of it? So the questions that, because ultimately that's what both of you, Karina and Dima, you really mentioned. It's about understanding exactly what are the questions we need to be asking first. And you mentioned it, the social, the contextual, the environmental factors behind the use of this technology. So Alloysius, can you say a little bit about that aspect for how you've built your systems with farmers?
Yeah, of course, yeah, thank you. I'll speak from the perspective of like the billion people that are offline and now often on social media. That's what we target on. That's what we target. And how many people here know that like there are 7,000 languages in dialects in Africa? Like, Ghana has 60 of them. Nigeria has 200, or 7,000 people, a billion people, a billion human lives that own and cultivate 60% of the world's arable land. No matter what is happening in the world, they will have to help in growing food. When we initially started building AI to reach these people, we thought that language was going to be the moat. That was going to be the differentiator for us, right? So we started investing in Hugging Face for the inference and AWS, and then hire a bunch of people to record all the audio files and then transcribe. We did it up to 43. And then we were spending $300,000 a year on compute, but then we're a small company, so we realized that actually we are not going to, we can't scale and reach many people with that approach, and the approach that we are using will eventually actually exclude people, and the best way to move forward is to collaborate. There are many other organizations. There's Ghana NLP working on languages, open source. Google did something called Waxal in West Africa. There's the LAPA in South Africa. We are kind of we are all still using the moat approach, the differentiator approach, but to reach all 7,000 languages in Africa and go to other places and get to reach 1 billion people, it might take some collaboration on the audios that we use to, train the AI. There are many call center services that have recorded audio file. We have 100 million seconds as a small company. So imagine all the mobile networks, all the audios that they have recorded. Those are audios that we can definitely collaborate on multiple languages to train the AI for low cost. Compute, we can collaborate on compute. If we are targeting the same, let's say if you're targeting Swahili, I'm targeting Swahili, it makes absolute sense to to collaborate on that to get the cost of compute down. But then also even the differentiation in the language. You mentioned the Hindu. English, yeah. We have Pidgin in Ghana, and then even my local language, Ewe, the type of Ewe that's spoken in the south, the central, and in the north are very different. And for people, language is almost spiritual. If you speak in the exact dialect of people, they trust you, they want to work with you. So for us to get to that level of accuracy that we've gotten for English, Spanish, and French, it's going to take a lot of collaboration for us to get close. And a few examples of how we are approaching that, in Ghana, we came up with this idea where we started reaching the politicians, the members of parliament. They always want to reach their people, and then they have a lot of influence. So we're like, hey, we're going to give you a podcast on a dumb phone for all your constituents so you can reach them. But then the catch is, can you get 100 people to join a WhatsApp group and then record audios and volunteers? And we're going to acknowledge them publicly, give them certificates. But then also we give them credit. You own the model, it's yours. You can use it for whatever, but we also get to use it for other things as well. And all that, right? And we are seeing that, we've seen that to start working. I also instructed my team that, hey, if we have, let's say we have our AI speak Hausa, but it's not very great. It speaks like a robot and often gets a lot of the phrases wrong. So if Lilapa has that right, or maybe Ghana LLP has that right, let's linking to their API, and the tech companies do that already. The big tech companies, they all have all these MCP servers that and then they redistribute other in models from maybe Anthropic or so we can bring the same thing also into development. All in all, what I'm trying to say is that we have a higher chance to reach more billions, reach a lot more people, especially people that are not yet online, people who still love to express themselves in audio, in voice. We have a higher chance of reaching them with all these high-value services if we collaborate on compute, if we collaborate on audio, and if we don't see language as a mode, because it won't be the mode over time.
So the question I had posed earlier when we started was this one of, who should have the most influence in shaping the development of these technologies. And what we've heard here is that, yes, it's the community itself, absolutely. We're also hearing that, well, we do need to collaborate with tech companies because they do have access to all sorts of different pieces of information, of data that we as communities require as well. What would you say is the role of the government and policymakers? Because no one really has brought that up. And I know that's a quite, yes, correct. But it's one that's sort of sitting in the back. And I just want to briefly, if each of you could just say just one or two words on that, and how you see the role of government and policymakers, because we've certainly already seen it from the researchers, the communities, the technologists, because that's what we are here, the entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think it's a very tough question, and I think we should be very careful what we wish for in terms of regulation and regulatory bodies. There's some governments, I want them the furthest possibly away from regulating the internet for us. We spent 15 years trying to unregulate what they've... What's definitely something we need to do more of, and I was listening to you speak and I was thinking, we need to be talking more about Swahili. Why are we not? Is multi-stakeholder conversations about the evolving natures of the harms that we're up against because of technology-enabled problems, of better mapping of what we across our research, civil society organizations, technologists, funders, lawyers, advocates are doing in our day-to-day, and then coming to the accountability and the regulation piece and what kind of escalation channels do we want to collectively build together. I think we're not there. I think we need to be talking more together in multi-stakeholder, and this is something funders in this room can definitely do. If you're wondering how can you help, civil society organizations got no budget to travel, got no budget to get in person in closed rooms and have difficult conversations about regulations and about accountability. Bring us together. If you're looking for something to do, create spaces for organizations and researchers and technologists and open source activists and advocates to get together, to build solutions together and then get to the accountabilities. I know what you think about regulation. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of it.
I think there needs to be balance. I think we've already learned where if there's limited regulations with big tech, it leads to technologies that over time create greater division and we lose social connectedness. I remember a time when Facebook was truly about reconnecting with your communities and being with your friends for like 5 seconds. Now we have addictive algorithms, we have a lack of accountability around big tech. And I understand for human rights issues and I understand for innovation issues or innovation opportunities why we don't want to regulate. But I'm actually hungry for some policy.
No, we want to regulate.
Oh, sorry, regulate. Okay.
I don't want governments to be regulating.
I think we do need,
Absolutely. No, absolutely. We need accountability channels.
Yes.
I don't think I want the Trump administration to be regulating what we do and not do online right now. It's like, so the role of government is what terrifies me.
Yeah.
Or the EU.
Well, because everything you've already discussed, I mean, truly, you've all talked about best practices. We could fall under that category, best practices in terms of entrepreneurs, as civil society, individuals, communities. Mm-hmm. You have already said, it's like you have your role is to offer that which is best for those that you're serving. And it's genuinely it's your value system. So already you're talking about that type, what some would call soft regulation. I don't like using that word because the concept of soft, what does that mean versus hard? But in terms of, it's not, yes, legally implemented yet, but at least from the value system that you have that very clear in your mind. And not many have that clear.
But we've also got 15 years of escalation channels to Twitter and to Facebook and to Meta and we had channels. There is a process to escalate instances of hate speech that's spreading virally on social media platforms. We wrote a report called Shouting in the Void, because this is how it feels. We escalate and then nothing happens. YouTube accounts get flagged and brought down with no explanation as to why that's happening. So what I'm saying is absolutely, but we need to learn from the 15 years of how it's been with commercial tech and see how can we organize better, how can we mobilize better.
Yeah. Talking about like governments, like from some African government perspective, I think there may be room for some to support the sector with energy and compute. Like if you think about Kenya having like 94% clean energy, and imagine if they can get some of that towards like setting up, data centers. And there's some private people coming into the space, like Dangote. They're creating the space for Dangote and Cassava Technologies from Zimbabwe to set up like data centers. Nigeria is trying to launch like a foundational model for Hausa and some local languages. It's not perfect yet, but like those are steps in the right direction. I do agree we have to be very careful and mindful of government because unchecked it could go the other way. But there are also some real ways. So for me, from that from the perspective of we pay so much tax already as a person, as a country, as a company. That has to be used, to help us compete or to be ready for the future. And one of the key ways is just helping with energy, compute, because we have to pay, like one of my colleagues, our engineer, he like hacked his own Hugging Face in-house. So now we don't have to pay Hugging Face all that money for inference. Imagine if that idea or that implementation can be scaled nationally. And then we put it in a data center in Accra versus me paying for a data center in Ireland, and paying in dollars. So every time the currency tanks, like paying triple, right? So those are things that government can do to make it a little bit easier, for innovators to build on top of, and also to be ready for the future.
So really to have sovereignty over the
100%.
Data, and the data centers.
The models.
Infrastructure, everything.
Exactly.
So I think this brings us perfectly to our ending, because I know we're going to have a Q&A right now. But before that, I want us to, in whichever order you would like, we have quite an audience here, policymakers, innovators, funders, investors, and I want you to appeal to the audience right now, and I want you to give an ask. So if you have only 1 or 2 minutes max, speak to them directly and say, this is exactly what I need and what we need to continue to bring impact to not just to your particular domain and area, but what that means for all areas. So the personal, but also the collective.
Yeah.
What's your ask?
I'd ask of investors to have greater trust in grassroots organizations. I think there's a lot of interest and excitement that I see from investments, but I see also equal hesitancy. And I think that then comes to life in the forms of, we want quick returns, we want really rigorous research, we want a lot of monitoring of your work. And at a time where the funding landscape is just brutal at the moment, and small organizations are having to get smaller grants across more funders, compounding the number of monitoring reports and whatnot, it's becoming really unmanageable and unsustainable. And I think unintentionally what's happening is it's also creating greater competition amongst partners in the sector. It's not really fostering collaboration, as investors are looking for us to make us distinct amongst each other, rather than seeing us as a greater sum of our parts. So I'd ask for greater trust. I'd ask for big tech, where the hell are you? In a room like this today, in an incredible forum, with so much influence that's going to shape our futures, I see a lot of claims. I see some grants and investments, but nowhere near the proportion of what the disruptions and displacements and the impacts on society and the environment, the size of that just doesn't match up. So I'd like to see less claims and more action. And for those that are entrepreneurs, educators, and technologists, I'd ask that you share as much as possible. I think there's a lot of fragmentation in the ecosystem at the moment. I see a lot of duplication in infrastructure and technologies, and we're entering a new phase of pilotitis. But I would ask that if you are looking at these technologies, to start in simple ways and start with the simplest solution, because it's far easier to work and address the problem than start with the technology and work that backwards to a problem.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's hard to beat that. So all that she said.
Yes, you covered quite a lot.
Yes, I mean to the funders in the room, if there's any, or investors, absolutely, but also the imagination of slow and patient funding. Like the immediacy that we're being put up against is never gonna solve the problems that we're trying to solve. But also it doesn't take billions. Also, this is what I want to say, is like, it's not that expensive to fund what we're trying to make, because we're doing it with close to nothing. And so, but again, the humility and the imagination of time, I think, is something we're absolutely needing right now. To the civil society organizations and the educators, if there are any, I love you so much. I appreciate everything you're doing. Be kind to yourself. You're doing amazing. It's a crazy world, and we're in this together. Remember the people you love, that they can create knowledge systems that serve them, that sound like them, that respects them. We don't have to consume it, we can make it. Let's remember that foundational principle of the internet as it was like 15 years ago. The normalization of hate speech online today, of the things that are said in public that 2-3 years ago, you couldn't say, I want to obliterate a whole civilization and get away with it. This is an informational crisis. It's a human rights crisis. And it's one that we need to put our minds and hearts and soul together to denormalize it. It is not okay to speak to each other like this, off or online. The same people who harass you online are the people who are nasty to you offline. And that interconnectedness, we need to remember it and get our stuff together. See, I didn't swear not once today. I'm so proud of myself right now. To get ours together to solve it, and hope. I want to hang on to that. As a Lebanese and an Arab, I choose to do that.
Thank you.
The ask innovators, take care of yourself, like you said. Cloud is great, but it can keep you awake at night. And all those agents, fixing your PowerPoint and Excel, and the dopamine release that you get from getting work done, building, coding, vibe coding, and working on multiple things is great in the short term. And this is advice to myself as well, but it can actually deprive you of sleep and lead to low quality decisions. So keep that in mind. The second one for innovators as well is just collaborate on models and compute and share credit, because credit seems to be very important to all of us, because you have to raise money, you have to be on or the fourth place or time 100 or whatever. All that will come, but let's collaborate for the future. For the investors, like you mentioned, more patience, have a long-term view. The world is like, what work means right now is actually changing. What value means right now is literally changing. And this could be an opportunity for impact investors, if there's some in the room, to maybe, challenge that balance sheet and P&L. Is there room to put impact on the as a valued system that we actually measure, like how we measure AR or revenue or like in profitability? Can we have a line actually there for impact so that we can truly recognize all the impact that everyone here and across the place is doing? And also encourage more collaboration across your portfolio. Today, AI is like a moat. So if you're writing a grant application, we are building this AI, and here's how it's different. So give us a grant. I'm not saying you don't fund that, but if there's someone already working on it and they spend 5 years or 10 years working on it, just encourage win-win collaboration, in my view. So the reason why that is very important is so that we don't unintentionally exclude people, especially low-resource languages, and the billions of people who speak all those low-resource languages. And also we don't duplicate efforts. So that's just my ask.
A very wise mentor friend of mine called Anasuya, who runs a great project called Whose Knowledge, said we need to stop saying low resource language and say high context languages.
High context languages.
And I love it so much.
Global majority.
Global,
yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think we have quite a lot of food for thought here. And ultimately what I'm hearing here is that we need to respect that which is our very humanness. And that is imagination, that is creativity, and the obsession for the return of investment. I know that we've all experienced that as entrepreneurs, is simply not the way to go. So with that in mind, I open the floor now to questions, and we have quite a lot of hands that popped up. So I think I see here, so if we could, on this side, please.
Hi, thank you very much for the amazing panel. My name is Alicia, I'm a researcher at the university. I was struck by all of your applications are absolutely amazing, and I'm, so supportive of them. I'm interested in the application specifically brought forth by Dima and Alloysius when we think about uncertainty in the future. So working in politically unstable climates, working with climate shocks, and having people use chatbot tools as a source of information in unstable circumstances. I think myself about in politically unstable situations. In the past, 10 years, I would turn to Twitter because that's where the most recent thing is. And so if people are turning to LLMs, which necessarily have this time lag between the data collection and the training, and then having a sensible response in times of, short-term, high-impact changes like climate crisis, like political instability, like violence, how do we cope with that? Thanks.
Answer, and then we'll, yeah.
How long it takes? I'm going to try and then you can. It's a big problem, but also it's even bigger problem for small organizations trying, because what people are used to, like what they compare Swahili to is Gemini and ChatGPT and Claude. And we always say it's never going to be this fast and it's never going to give you the answer you want, because also we're not building it to do that thing. We're building it to do something completely different. So that's not. There's infrastructurally some things that we've built into Swahili of how often the data get updated from the live RSS feeds that feed its data sources. Swahili is built to only pull data from the community's own reporting. So it does not reproduce the inequalities of the internet. So as an organization, you build your own hub yourself, and you choose what sources of the internet are going to create the answer to the prompts that your community are giving. This gives us control over what constitutes sourceable, evidentiable sources of data to build answers to people. How often that updates and how quickly it can respond, and that lag between accuracy and speed is one of our biggest problems right now, because the better the answer, the slower the answer, and the faster Claude is getting. And this triangle of doom right now is where we're stuck. There's solutions that we can do inside of the infrastructure itself, but I want to go back to something, Karina, you said before about all the work that happens outside of the conversations with the bot. The expectations of what you're coming to see, like what is this tool that we built for you? The work you do with communities on what is it that you want? Do you want like small, measured answer that takes into considerations projections? So a lot of thinking we're doing is on trying to do analysis of the informational needs right now, because one really cool feature I love about this product is it's got a dashboard that basically uses ML to explain to you trends. How are people asking questions? What are the main unanswered questions? What are the answered questions? What are the main sources that are getting pulled to answer? What this gives you is not only does it explain to you the information needs right now, it makes you somebody who can tell the future. You can actually tell, if you're paying attention and if you're listening to the questions your communities are asking, you can actually foresee what they're likely to ask about when that same crisis hits again in the future. So there are things we can do that we can build into the infrastructure itself to help us better understand the informational gap and put us in a better position to answer it, but absolutely recognizing the limitation of this.
And that's exactly the example of what intentional design means.
100%.
Yeah, let me just add something quickly. I get a question now. So, like, we also learned that very quickly when we're trying to get our DALL-E AI to act like a call center agent, and we realized that it was never going to be fast. And we tried everything possible. There's always this 5 to 10 seconds lag between getting the question, going to fetch the answer, transcribe back to audio, and then play it back to the person. No matter the engineering, it's always slow. So we just accepted that this is actually for taking feedback and then translating for somebody to follow up. So with that, it actually just like helped. So people call, they leave their feedback, and they don't wait for answers. They get the answers later. We also built something called context and awareness, where we use the inputs from the users, to retrain the LLM. So if we have this app called Just Farm, where people take, commercial farmers have smartphones, able to take information on their farm, agronomy, use, and all that. And all that content goes back to train the foundational LLM behind it. So then when you come in, they can remember you, hey, Kofi, this is your farm. You have 2 acres here. You're growing cassava. So it then is able to use that to then advise you. It's not perfect yet, but that's the closest we are getting to from removing uncertainty and getting closer and closer to what people need.
A true feedback loop here of design, of intentional design. Please.
Thank you so much for sharing and for your pioneering work. My name is Felipe from Colombia with Fair Trade Certified. I love the examples that you gave around deterministic AI and about predictive AI and what you're doing now with generative AI at the individual level and everything around intentional design and much of the advice that you gave is right on. One of the things that we're really excited about, and to Karina's point about trusting grassroots organizations, is what will be available with agentic AI. We've always believed in the agency of rural cooperatives, of farmers, or of community development groups of workers. And I'm curious as to how you see that next wave evolving. What are you excited about? And if we were to look at all of these grassroots organizations, whether farmer cooperatives or whether democracy building and human right defending organization or health clinics for young women, what is next in terms of what they could be doing as grassroots organizations if they had the right support from machine agents to do things better, to do more with less, to be more empowered?
Let me jump on that because it's a very exciting question and one which we're working on at the moment with our chatbots. So we have prototypes of an agentic system at the moment. Our chatbots are really great at what's called single-turn conversations. You have a question, here's an answer, and maybe some suggested recommendations of how to continue that conversation. It's not the type of experience you might have with Claude or GPT, where there's this very sycophantic algorithm that's trying to get you to sustain a conversations. And that's where we see a lot of anthropomorphic, unhealthy relationships that young teens are building with chatbots. They're really turning more to chatbots for relationships. Where we are going in terms of agentic AI is into multi-turn conversations, but limited within specific goals. Not that we want to have an endless, free-flowing, sycophantic conversation with young people, but we want to be much more proactive in that conversation. We don't want to wait for a question that we need to react to. We want to build predictive models that determine through the conversations that we're having with young people, are they at risk? And what is the guided pathway in terms of content that they need to consume over time? And sometimes it's a long time, depending on what stage of readiness that they're at, that sees them make informed choices that lead to real-world change. So we're now building agents that are specific to mental health, working on low-intensity therapies to manage anxiety, worry, and stress. We're building agentic, what we call SPCC agents that are a number of different agents that segment users on stages of readiness and can classify them into recommender systems. We're working on agents that's purely around small talk, in which our chatbots are not very good. If a young person says, "Hey, how you doing today, big sis?" We're like, "Oh, we can only talk about sexual health." So we're working on agents that are a little bit more human, again, but within limited terms. This is very difficult because the new challenge that we have is we're really great at evaluating and ensuring that we can answer a question, it's accurate, safe, relatable, reliable. But once you start to have a free-flowing conversation, what we notice is a degradation in the safety benchmarks. You might experience this sometimes in cloud or with GPT, where it says, actually, too much memory, you need to start an entirely different conversation. We're experiencing this in our safety benchmarks. The more free-flowing conversation you have, safety degrades into that conversation. The memory, the compute, it's too much. So where we're currently working on and working with Stanford University at the moment is research on how do you have evaluation benchmarks across a sustained conversation, one that leads to a specific goal and not just endless conversation. But that's where we're going to next. Yeah.
Can I jump on what we're excited about? One of the things I'm most excited about with the conversations with grassroots organizations now is that they don't want a bot that sounds like a human. They want a bot that sounds like a bot, and they want a human that sounds like a human. And that distinction I love so much. Like at a time when we're trying to train chatbots on personalization features and what tone, like Swali's got 6 different tones. You can sound like a journalist, you can sound like, you know, your best friend. You can. At that time, civil society organizations coming to us and saying, we want the line. This is the machine, this is the human, and we want it to be clear. And I think this is such an interesting point because it's a shift. Because at the beginning, it was like, the more human it sounds, the better it is. And now civil society is saying, no, I want to trust the safety, to go back to safety benchmarking, is I want to know when the people, the community I'm trying to serve is comfortable with talking to an LM, and when it actually wants a human in that conversation, and making that distinction clear is really interesting. So some of the most interesting work that's happening is these benchmarks. Like we're building what we call golden questions, like huge data sets with organizations on when asked this question, this is the answer. When asked this question, but this is my organization's best answer. So there is a way to bring in the voice of the organization into their hubs, into their Swali bots, but also them being like, I want to clear the demarcation between when it's the human and when it's the bot. And for me, this is a very exciting, it's us taking back the tech like we did that ages ago.
So once again, intentional design is now also, to add to the list of what that entails, if we're ultimately defining what that is to understand what the expectation truly is between this, again, human-computer interactive relationship. And that, again, we're seeing that is fundamental. If you don't have that clear, you're truly not going to design a system that will be useful, that will be trusted. I know I saw another hand, so please.
Hi, thank you. I'm without voice, but I will try. I'm Flora from Pulitzer Center. And first of all, congratulations. It was amazing to hear all of you. I quickly searched the LinkedIn profiles, and I saw the 3 of you doesn't come from tech studies. I see media, I see cultural. So for those like me that want to start, I think one of you said, build your own technology yourself. Who are the partners? Know where to start? Who do we partner with? And how do we do it as well? Not being complicit with AI, big techs, and accountability. And then I have a second question, and I hope that doesn't stop the first one to be answered. But I think my mind went a little bit of a bug when you talked about non-regulating in media rights or in digital rights. I'm from Brazil, and that's a big fighting digital rights against big techs being above the government or above the laws. I'm sure there is some unexplored, and I would love to hear more if you could explore and extend that argument. What is the difference, and why are you against regulation?
I'm going to say it one more time. I'm not calling for non-regulation. I'm calling for governments to not regulate on their own. We need to regulate. We just need to be a multi-stakeholder consultations. And I want everyone here, a civil society organization who's an angry feminist because of how the internet's turned, to be on the table of that regulation. So we need to regulate. I'm just saying, governments, EU Parliament, please don't regulate the internet for us without us. That's.
We spoke about coding. I think this is actually a very good time now to start coding again. Like, I used to be a web guy about 13 years ago, and then all the technologies changed, and I was not very helpful to our engineering team. And then now we have all these, vibe coding tools like Replit. I live in Replit. It doesn't build production-grade applications, but it helps me to prototype very quickly. So my team has given me access to our repo and then our APIs, so I can spend time coding and building things instead of just talking and repeating the same thing over and over again. So it's actually a really, really good time, and those apps are getting really smart and better. So if you use Replit and Cloud combined, I found those to be very, very useful, and I found that it's actually helping me to empathize with my engineering team more, but then also be much more clearer in sharing ideas on what I think we should be building next.
I'll answer your question around where do you start. So I was a fashion designer. I nearly got my PhD in fashion design. I went to live in India in a garment factory, studying and researching sustainability in fashion, where I started documenting the lives of women in factories. And that's what brought me to Nike Foundation, who was similarly trying to employ media to bring about change. And it was through trying to disseminate information that we realized that young people were increasingly online. So I had to learn what the online world was about and how to design features and products that were digitally led. I would say that the fastest route to building your community of not just technologists, but service designers, UX designers, researchers, young women, I would find there's a lot of communities already out there. The ICT for D community, HCD Exchange, there's the ICT for D conference coming up in Nairobi. These are fantastic opportunities to find that community and embed yourself in that community, because those are all people that perhaps didn't start from a tech background, but are delivering some really incredible tools.
And also there's 2 more days to this. Yes. So let's talk more.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it gets red, by the way.
So we're right at the
countdown changes color the closest we
Yes,
get.
so we're right at the end, and I really want to first thank all of you here. What a fantastic conversation. Thank you to our audience for listening, for posing those questions. And again, this highlights how important really the humanistic disciplines are, because the 4 of us have a background in that. And yet, here we are as technologists. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.